You ever have one of those moments where someone pushes you just a little too far and you realize, okay, it's time to teach them a lesson? That's exactly where I was when this whole thing started. You see, I live by a beautiful lake. It's peaceful, relaxing, and for years, it was my little slice of heaven. I bought a boat a couple of years ago. Not just any boat, but one I'd been dreaming about since I was a teenager. It wasn't small. It wasn't modest. It was big, bold, and beautiful. The kind of boat that turns heads every time you take it out on the water. And for me, that boat was a reward. Years of hard work, saving every penny, and finally, I got something that made me feel proud every single time I looked at it. Now, most of my neighbors loved it. They'd wave when I passed by, some even asked for rides, and I was always happy to share the joy. But then there was them, the Johnsons. You know the type. The kind of people who seem to believe the neighborhood is their personal kingdom. Always complaining about something, always finding fault. Too many cars in your driveway? They'll call the HOA. Your grass is half an inch taller than it should be? Expect a note in your mailbox. And now, they had set their sights on my boat. It started with comments. "Oh, that thing's an eyesore," Mrs. Johnson would say loud enough for me to hear, as she just happened to be walking her dog. Then her husband would make snide remarks about people who think the lake is their private playground. I ignored it at first. You learn not to feed the fire with people like that. But one day, things changed. I got a letter from the HOA. They claimed my boat was too large to be stored in my driveway and that it was a safety hazard to the view of other residents. A safety hazard to the view. I actually laughed out loud when I read it, but the laughter faded quickly when I saw the bottom of the letter. Failure to remove the boat from your property within 14 days will result in fines and potential legal action. Now here's the thing. I knew my rights. I'd checked the HOA rules when I moved in, and nothing I was doing was against the guidelines. But the Johnsons? Oh, they'd clearly decided to make it personal. I could feel it. And that's when something inside me clicked. If they wanted to play games, I'd play too. But I'd make sure to win in a way they'd never forget. For the next week, I kept my head down, pretended to be complying. I even moved my boat off the driveway, just so they thought they'd won. But while they were probably celebrating, I was working on a little surprise. See, the Johnsons had a massive, perfectly manicured lawn right by the lake. It was their pride and joy. And one Saturday morning, after a little bit of careful planning and a few favors from friends with trucks and straps, I relocated my boat. Not to another storage lot, not to a friend's place. Nope. I docked it right on their lawn. Now, before you think I lost my mind, hear me out. Their property had a small section of open lake access, and technically, there was nothing in the HOA rules about temporarily docking a boat on private land if given verbal permission by the owner. And while they obviously hadn't given me permission, well, let's just say there's a little-known loophole about neighborly shared space during community events. And I decided that morning we were having an event. The moment was priceless. I'll never forget it. It was about 9 a.m. when they came outside. Mrs. Johnson had her coffee in one hand, ready to start her usual morning routine of criticizing the world. She froze mid-step. There it was. My giant, gleaming boat sitting proudly on her precious green grass, sunlight bouncing off the polished hull, making it look like it had been parked there for a photo shoot. Mr. Johnson came out right after, and his face went from confusion to disbelief to full-blown rage in seconds. They stormed over, demanding to know what in the world I thought I was doing. I just smiled, leaned casually on the railing, and said, "Well, since my boat was apparently too big for my property, I figured it needed somewhere special. And honestly, your lawn seemed perfect." The look on their faces, worth every second of planning. But it wasn't just about the look. Oh no. By then, half the neighborhood had heard the commotion and gathered around. People were laughing, taking pictures, a few even cheering, and I could tell that for once, the Johnsons weren't in control of the narrative. They were humiliated. Now here's where things got interesting. They threatened to call the police. I told them to go right ahead. I knew exactly what would happen. And sure enough, when the officers showed up, they were polite but slightly amused. They explained that while the situation was unusual, it wasn't technically illegal under community event rules, which meant there wasn't much they could do. The Johnsons were furious. I could see Mrs. Johnson's hands shaking as she pointed toward my boat, insisting this was vandalism. The officer simply shrugged and said, "Ma'am, maybe talk to your HOA about clearer guidelines." I almost felt bad. Almost. But the best part? Oh, that was still to come. I had a plan to make sure this moment would be burned into their memories. Forever. A little twist they would never see coming. And it involved not just keeping the boat there a little longer, but turning the entire situation into something they'd have to smile through, whether they liked it or not. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I heard wasn't the birds, it was the sharp knock on my door. I already knew who it would be before I even looked through the peephole. It was them, standing on my porch like they owned the neighborhood. Arms crossed, eyes locked on me like I was some kind of criminal. The man spoke first, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We need to talk about the obstruction." Obstruction. That's what they were calling it now. My boat, my pride and joy. The one they claimed was an eyesore, a nuisance, a violation of neighborhood harmony. I stepped out slowly, feeling the morning sun hit my face, and I couldn't help the smirk that formed when I saw their expressions. Half anger, half disbelief. "It's not an obstruction," I said calmly. "It's my property, and as far as I know, my property line is right where your lawn starts." His wife's voice shot in like a dagger. "You can't just leave it there." But I could. See it in their eyes. They didn't think I'd actually go through with it. They thought I'd be too scared, too embarrassed, too willing to fold under the pressure. That's the thing about people like them. They think the rules they make in their heads are the same as the laws everyone has to follow. I walked with them to the boat, every step deliberate, feeling the crunch of their perfectly trimmed grass under my shoes. They kept talking about permits, city ordinances, some rule book they swore existed, but when I asked for proof, they had nothing. Just words. Just the kind of noise people make when they think they're in charge. The boat sat, there like a monument, gleaming in the morning light, every polished surface reflecting the sky. I had parked it with precision, not an inch over the line, not a millimeter beyond what was legally mine to use. And yet, they acted like I had crashed a spaceship into their front yard. The man reached out, tapping the hull with his knuckle. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. I leaned in and whispered just loud enough for them to hear, "You started this." By midday, word had spread through the neighborhood. People slowed their morning walks to stare, some hiding their smiles, others pretending not to look. Kids. Loved it. They pointed at the boat, laughing, asking if we were throwing a party on the lawn. That only made the couple angrier. They hated attention unless they were the ones in control of it. Around noon, I saw the code enforcement officer pull up. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, walking like every step was a statement. He inspected the boat, measured the distance to the road, looked at the property line marker, and then turned to the couple with a shrug. "It's within limits," he said simply. The color drained from their faces. I could almost hear the sound of their defeat. But instead of backing down, they doubled their efforts, insisting there had to be some rule, some technicality, something that could force me to move it. The rest of the day was a battle of glares and silent standoffs. I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching them pace like caged animals, whispering furiously to each other. Every so often, I'd get up and pretend to check the boat, tighten a rope here, wipe down a spot there, just to remind them it wasn't going anywhere. A few neighbors even came by to compliment it, some joking about bringing lawn chairs to hang out beside it. The couple didn't like that either. Their perfectly curated image of control over the block was cracking, and the sound of it breaking was music to my ears. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across their precious lawn, I caught the man standing by the boat again. He ran his hand along the side, not in admiration, but in quiet frustration. I walked up behind him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, the kind of look that tells you he's trying to figure out how you got the upper hand. I gave the hull a final pat and headed back inside, leaving him there with the reality he couldn't change. And as I closed the door, I realized something. This wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about showing them that not everyone bends when they push. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Something in the air felt different, quieter, heavier, like the calm before a storm. I made myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside, expecting to see the boat right where I left it, gleaming in, the early light. But before my eyes even found it, I noticed movement across the street. There they were again, both of them, standing in their driveway with phones in hand, pointing toward my property. I could hear snippets of their conversation. Words like lawyer and complaint floating in the air. It was almost comical at this point, the way they clung to the hope that someone else would swoop in and fight their battle for them. As I sipped my coffee, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver hopped out and walked toward me, carrying a large box. "Got something for you," he said with a grin. I hadn't ordered anything recently, so I was confused, until I saw the label. It was from my cousin Mike, a fellow boater with a wicked sense of humor. Inside was a custom-made sign, bold letters on polished wood. "Welcome aboard. Docking fee 0.0. I knew exactly where to put it. Within minutes, the sign was mounted proudly on the boat, visible from every angle of their living room window. When they saw it, the wife's jaw literally dropped. The man clenched his fists like he was holding back an explosion. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The day went on, and more neighbors stopped by. Some wanted pictures. With the boat, others offered snacks and joked about turning it into a weekend hangout. The couple stayed inside most of the afternoon, blinds twitching every now and then as they peeked out. Around 3 o'clock, I noticed a police cruiser pull into the street. 2 officers stepped out and walked over to me. My heart raced for a second, not because I thought I was in trouble, but because I knew this was the big move my neighbors had been waiting for. The officers were polite, professional. They asked a few questions, took a look at the boat, and then checked my property survey. After a few minutes, one of them turned to the couple who had come out to watch the showdown. "There's nothing illegal here," the officer said. "It's entirely on his property." The man tried to protest, waving his arms, talking about community standards, but the officer cut him off. "Standards aren't laws," he said firmly. "He's within his rights." And just like that, the police left. It was over. At least legally, but I knew them well enough to understand this wasn't the end. People like that don't stop just because they lose on paper. They find new ways to dig. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to the sound of a lawnmower. Not unusual, except this one was roaring far too close to the boat. I looked out and saw the man mowing right along the property line, the mower's side chute flinging clippings and dust onto the hull. I stepped outside, walked over slowly, and stood in his path. "Need something?" I asked. He just smiled, that tight, fake smile that hides 1,000 curses. "Just keeping things tidy," he said, then turned away. That was when I decided to end it on my own terms. I didn't want to spend the rest of the summer in a cold war over a patch of grass. I wanted the last word, but I also wanted peace. So I called up my friend Dave, who owns a small marina about 30 minutes away. By the next weekend, we had a plan. Early Saturday morning, before most of the neighborhood was awake, Dave arrived with his trailer. We hitched up the boat carefully, maneuvered it out, and drove it away. But I didn't just leave an empty space behind. In its place, I left something else. An inflatable kiddie pool, right in the exact spot where the boat had been. Inside it, I placed a plastic toy sailboat, and the sign my cousin had sent me. The sight of that tiny pool on their lawn's edge was the perfect punctuation mark. When they came out later that morning, the look on their faces was priceless. First confusion, then realization, then that same slow burn of frustration. But this time, they didn't say a word. Maybe they knew they'd been beaten, not by aggression, but by humor and patience. The neighborhood, of course, got wind of it instantly. People laughed, took pictures, and the story started spreading even beyond our street. I began hearing from friends in other towns who had seen photos online with captions like, "Neighborhood Petty Wars, Level 100. In the weeks that followed, things got quieter. The couple didn't make eye contact with me, didn't wave, didn't even pretend to be friendly anymore, which was fine by me. I had my boat safely docked at Dave's marina, ready for weekends out on the water, and every time I passed by that little patch of lawn, I remembered the whole saga and couldn't help but smile. The lesson was simple. Sometimes, standing your ground doesn't mean being the loudest, it means being the smartest. And sometimes the sweetest victory is the one that makes your opponent realize you can't be pushed around, not because you fight back with fists, but because you fight back with wit. Looking back now, I realize they were never really mad about the boat itself. The boat was just a symbol, a reminder that they didn't control everything and everyone around them. And maybe that's why it bothered them so much, because for once, they couldn't win. They couldn't bend someone to their will. And for me, that's the real victory.